My name is Kaveh Rastami, and I need to tell you something before I say anything else. I am not a poor man who found God and got rich. I am not someone who came from nothing and built something. I am the opposite of that story. I was a man who had more money than he could count, more power than most men dream about, more respect than he deserved, and I was dying on the inside every single day. Not slowly, not quietly. I was bleeding out behind walls that cost more than most people will ever see in their lives. I had a bedroom in my house in Tehran that was larger than some apartments I have seen in London. I had cars parked in my garage that I sometimes forgot I owned. I had people working for me who woke up every morning thinking about what I needed before I had even opened my eyes. I had everything, and I want you to hear me when I say this. I had absolutely nothing that mattered, not one thing. The night my oldest son did not come home, I sat on the edge of a bed that probably cost more than your car, and I cried like I was 5 years old. Not because I was sad, I had been sad before. I cried because I realized I was the most powerful man I knew, and I could not do one single thing about what was happening to my own family. All those years of building and pushing and winning meant nothing in that moment. That night broke something in me that money could never fix. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because if you are going to understand how I ended up on the floor of a hotel room in Baku, talking to a God I had been told my whole life was not the real God, you need to understand where I started. I was born in 1970 in Qum, Iran. If you know anything about Iran, you know Qum is not just a city. It is one of the great centers of religious learning in the entire Shia Muslim world. I grew up breathing that air. I grew up surrounded by faith the way some children grow up surrounded by music or sports. It was everywhere, in the call to prayer that woke us every morning, in the food my mother made during Ramadan, in the way my father washed his hands before touching the Quran, in the way my grandmother lowered her eyes when she walked past men in the street. My father, Hassan Rastami, was a trader, not in the traditional sense of sitting in a market selling bread or fabric. He bought things in one place and sold them in another for more money. He understood movement. He understood that value was never fixed, that something worth almost nothing in one location could be worth a great deal somewhere else. He taught me this when I was young. He said, Kaveh, the man who moves things is the man who controls things, and controlling things is how you survive in this world. My mother, Zara, was the opposite of my father in almost every way. She was quiet. She read constantly. She prayed more than anyone I have ever known, but not like she was reciting memorized words. She actually talked to God. She would whisper things to him in the kitchen while cooking. She would cry sometimes while praying, not sad crying, something else, something I did not understand then. I understand it now. She raised me to know that everything we had came from God, every piece of bread, every coin my father earned, every breath we took. She said, Kaveh, we are only visitors here. We do not own anything. We are only holding it for a while. I nodded when she said these things, because she was my mother and I loved her, but I did not really believe them. I thought she was being humble the way religious people are supposed to be humble. I thought the truth was what my father showed me, that you earn what you work for, that you take what you can take, that the man who works hardest ends up with the most. I chose my father's truth. For many years, it worked. By 19, I was already working alongside my father, moving goods between Tehran and Tabriz, learning how contracts worked, learning how to speak to men twice my age and make them feel they were getting a fair deal when they were actually getting exactly the deal I wanted. I had a way with people. I could walk into a room and read it within 2 minutes, who had power, who wanted power, who was pretending. My father said I could sell water in a flood. When the economy began shifting in Iran in the years after the war, I saw opportunities other people were too frightened or too slow to see. I moved into construction, not building things with my hands, but supplying what builders needed: steel, glass, cement. The materials a growing country needs in enormous quantities. Iran was rebuilding, and I was there with everything it needed. I was 32 when I crossed the line from successful to genuinely wealthy. I signed a contract with a government infrastructure project worth more than my father had made in his entire lifetime. I remember sitting in a government office in Tehran after the papers were signed, the man across from me shaking my hand and calling me Mr. Rastami, and feeling something move in my chest. Not happiness exactly, more like hunger. As though I had tasted something for the first time and now needed more of it, that hunger drove me for the next 15 years. By my mid-40s, I had built what I can only call an empire. Companies operating in Tehran, Tabriz and Kerman, partnerships with firms in Turkey and Azerbaijan, apartment buildings, commercial properties, warehouses, vehicles, hundreds of people on my payroll, accounts in multiple currencies across multiple countries. I sat at a dinner table once in Zurich and realized the men on either side of me were people I had read about in financial news, and they were speaking to me as an equal because I was one. The outside world looked at Kaveh Rostami and saw success, and I gave them every reason to see exactly that. But underneath, something was happening that nobody could see. I did not even let myself look at it most of the time. I had been married twice before I turned 40. My first wife, Parisa, was a smart, gentle woman, the kind who remembered small things about people and made them feel seen. We were married 6 years. She left after telling me more than once that she felt like she was living in a beautiful cage. Kaveh, she said, you take care of everything except me. You provide everything except yourself. She was not wrong. I was never home, and when I was home, my mind was somewhere else, in a meeting, on a call, 3 moves ahead in some negotiation. Parisa needed a husband. I was more like a very generous business partner who occasionally slept in the same bed. My second marriage lasted 3 years. My wife, Elam, was younger, and I think she married the idea of me more than she married me. When she discovered what I was actually like to live with, she did not hide her disappointment. She told me once that she had more conversations with my assistant in a month than she had with me. That one stayed with me not because it changed me, but because it was true, and I still did not change. I had 3 children, 2 with Parisa, 1 with Elam. I am not proud of the kind of father I was. I was the kind who arrived with expensive gifts and left before the holiday was over because something had come up. I was the kind whose children learned not to expect him. That is a terrible thing for a child to learn, that their father is someone you do not expect. My son Darian, the oldest from my first marriage, was 23 when the thing happened that split my life in half. He had been working at one of my companies in Tabriz. I had placed him there thinking it would help him grow, give him responsibility, teach him the way my father had taught me, but I had not actually paid attention to how he was doing. I checked numbers. I asked his manager for reports. I did not ask Darian how he was feeling. I did not notice that something was wrong. He borrowed money, a great deal of it, from the wrong people, not banks. The kind of people who operate in the space between legal and not legal, who are patient until they are suddenly not patient at all, and who express their impatience in very direct ways. I found out on a Tuesday. My phone rang at 11 at night. It was Darian. His voice sounded like someone standing on the edge of something very high. He told me what he had done. He told me how much he owed. He told me 2 men had come to his apartment and given him 2 weeks. I will not tell you I was calm. I drove to Tabriz that same night. I sat in my car for 6 hours, driving through dark roads, and I did not feel the time pass because my mind was completely full of one thought. I did not know my son was in trouble. He was working for me. He carried my name and my blood, and I did not know he was drowning. I fixed the problem. That part was easy. Money can fix many problems, and I had enough of it. I paid what he owed. I moved him back to Tehran. I set him up in a role I could watch more closely. But the thing that could not be fixed with money was the thought that sat in my chest driving back from Tabriz that night. I tried to remember the last real conversation I had with Darian, the kind where you actually look at a person, ask them something, and wait for the answer. I could not remember one, not in years. That thought sat in my chest like a stone and did not go away. It was there the next morning. It was there 3 weeks later. It was there during a board meeting in Tehran, a man explaining quarterly projections while I nodded and thought instead about how my son had been falling apart while I reviewed reports about his department without once seeing him. I went back to my prayers. I had always prayed not the way my mother prayed, but I prayed 5 times a day or close to it. I fasted during Ramadan. I gave the required charity and more. I was not, by any measure anyone around me could see, a bad Muslim. But after that night, I began praying differently. I began asking things, not just reciting words and bowing and rising. Why am I empty? I have everything and I have nothing. What is wrong with me? What am I missing? Why does it feel like I am living in a house that looks perfect from the outside, but when you walk in, it is just walls and nothing else? I went to see a respected cleric in Tehran, a man people traveled across the country to consult. I sat in his room and told him about the emptiness, not in those exact words because I was embarrassed. I was Kaveh Rostami. I could not sit in front of a religious man and say I was falling apart, so I described it carefully. I said my faith felt dry, that my prayers felt like habit, not connection, that I gave and felt nothing from it. He was kind. He listened. He said the words I expected him to say, that this was a test from God, that patience was the answer, that I should increase my prayers, read more, give more charity, perform extra pilgrimages. He said the reward was coming, just not now. Later, I thanked him, drove home and felt nothing. That was the part I could not tell anyone. I was doing everything right and feeling absolutely nothing. Not one drop of peace. Not one moment where I felt something above me had actually heard me. I was alone in the most crowded possible life, surrounded by people and activity and noise, and I was alone in the middle of all of it. About 8 months after the situation with Darian, I had a business trip to Baku. Not unusual, I traveled to Azerbaijan regularly. I had partners there, and I was exploring investment opportunities in the city. I checked into a hotel near the Caspian waterfront, a good room with a view of the bay. Dinner with partners the first night, meetings the following 2 days, everything moving forward the way it was supposed to. On the third day, my meetings ended early. My partners invited me to join them for an evening at a restaurant along the boulevard. I said no. I did not fully know why. I just did not want to be around people. I wanted to walk outside alone, without a destination. I walked from the hotel through the streets near the old city without a map. Past restaurants, small shops, buildings with old stone faces and new signs. Past a group of young people laughing on some steps. Past an old man selling roasted chestnuts from a cart. I walked until I no longer recognized where I was, which is not easy to do in a city that size, but I managed it. I ended up along the Caspian promenade, near a stretch where benches faced the water. I sat down on one of them. Not a special place, just a bench in a city where I did not live. A man was sitting on the bench beside mine, a small gap between us. He was East African, maybe Ethiopian. I could not tell for certain. He wore work clothes, the kind you wear for physical labor. Not young, maybe 55. His face had the kind of lines that come from many years in the sun. He was eating something simple from a small container, bread and something else, the kind of lunch that costs almost nothing, and he was reading. A small book with a worn cover, read slowly, as though each line was worth spending time on. His face is the thing that stopped me from looking away. He looked peaceful, not the happy look people wear when something good has just happened, but something steadier than that, something that did not appear to be going anywhere regardless of what happened around him. A man eating a simple lunch in a public place, more settled inside himself than I had felt in 20 years. I watched him for a while. I'm not usually someone who starts conversations with strangers. I am usually the one other people approach. But I got up and moved to his bench and said hello. He looked up. His eyes were calm. He said hello back in English, the way you do when you are unsure which language to use. I asked if he was from Ethiopia. He smiled and said, Eritrea, but close enough. His name was Emmanuel Tesfaye. He had been living in Baku for 6 years, working construction. He had a wife and 2 children back home. He sent money home every month. He spoke to his family when he could. I asked him what he was reading. He held it up slowly, watching my face as he did. It was a Bible. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment. My first reaction was the one I had been trained to have my entire life. A small alarm went off, a voice that sounded like every religious teacher I had ever had, saying, "This is wrong. This is the changed book. This is not the truth, be careful." I had been taught since childhood that the Bible was a corrupted document, that Christians and Jews had altered the original message, that the real truth existed only in the Quran. But something else happened too, underneath the alarm. A kind of pulling, like catching a smell from a distance you cannot identify but want to move closer to. I did not get up. I asked him what he was reading in it. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "A man named Jesus said something today that I needed to hear." What did he say? Emmanuel opened the Bible to a page marked with a small folded piece of paper. He read slowly in English, "Come to me, all you who are tired and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest." He closed the book and looked out at the water. I did not say anything. I sat with those words for a moment. "Come to me, I will give you rest. Do you believe that?" I asked that those words are actually true. He turned and looked at me with those steady eyes. "I know they are true," he said, "because I was the most broken man I knew before Jesus, and I am sitting here right now with almost nothing, and I am not broken anymore." He told me his story, not all of it, just enough. He said he had spent years angry at everything and everyone. He had left his family in a bad state when he came to Baku to work. He had not been a good husband or father. He was in a foreign country, far from everything, and one night a colleague, also from Eritrea, invited him to a small gathering of believers in someone's apartment. He went only because he had nothing else to do that evening and was tired of sitting alone. He said the people there sang some songs, someone read from the Bible, and then they prayed. He said the praying was different from any praying he had heard before. Not recitation, it sounded like people talking to someone they actually knew, someone they believed was truly in the room with them. He said he sat in the corner feeling nothing for most of the evening. But at the end, one man prayed aloud for everyone who was tired, who was far from home, who felt like they had failed everyone counting on them. Emmanuel said he did not know how that man had known the exact words to say. It felt like someone had looked directly at him and said, "I see you." And then the man said, "Jesus sees you too, and Jesus is the only person who has ever loved anyone without any condition at all." Emmanuel said something moved in his chest that night. Like a door opened somewhere inside him he had not known had a door. He started crying and could not stop. He asked Jesus to forgive him, to help him, to be real to him if he was real. And something changed. Nothing outside changed, same construction site, same small room, same distance from home. But inside something settled. "I cannot explain it better than that," he said. "I just know I am different. I know something is living inside me now that was not there before, and that thing is peace, real peace, not the peace you feel when things go well, the peace that stays when things are difficult." I sat on that bench for almost an hour with this man. I forgot where I was supposed to be. I forgot about the meetings and the deals and the life I had built. I just sat there. When I finally got up to leave, Emmanuel tore a small piece of paper from the margin of a page at the back of his Bible. He wrote something on it with a pen from his shirt pocket, handed it to me and said, "Read this tonight when you are quiet." I took it. I thanked him. I walked back to my hotel. That night I sat in my room. The Caspian was visible through the window, lights strung along the boulevard, boats moving slowly across the dark water. I poured myself a glass of water and sat near the window and reached into my jacket pocket for the piece of paper. He had written the same words he had read to me on the bench. "Come to me, all you who are tired and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest." And underneath, the reference, Matthew 11 verse 28, I read it twice. I put the paper on the table beside the chair. I looked out the window. I thought about Parisa telling me she was living in a beautiful cage. I thought about Elam saying she talked more to my assistant than to me in a month. I thought about Darian on the phone at 11 at night, his voice like someone standing on a high edge. I thought about all the prayers I had prayed that went up and never came back. I thought about sitting in that cleric's room in Tehran and leaving feeling exactly as I had walking in. I thought about standing at the window of my house on the quiet nights, asking myself why everything felt made of paper, real looking on the outside, hollow if you pressed on it. I was tired. I did not know how tired until I sat in that chair with that paper in my hand and admitted it to myself. Exhausted not from work, but from carrying something with no name, something I had carried for so many years I had stopped noticing its weight. But it was there. It was very heavy, and no one had ever offered to take it. "Come to me, I will give you rest." I did not plan what happened next. I slid off the chair onto the floor, not from losing my balance, but the way you go to the floor when you cannot stand anymore, when something inside you simply gives out. I pressed my forehead against the carpet of that hotel room and said the name I had been taught my whole life was not the right name to call to. Quietly, I said, "Jesus," and then I said the rest of what was inside me. "I do not know if you are real. I have been told you are not who your followers say you are. I have been told your book was changed. I have been told you were only a prophet and nothing more. But I am on the floor of a hotel room in Baku, and I am more alone than I have ever been in my life. And I just met a man who had almost nothing, and he had something I have never had. So if you are who he says you are, I need you to show me. I have nothing left to try. I have done everything I know how to do, and I am still empty. I am so tired. Please, if you are real, give me what you promised that man." I stayed on the floor. The room was very quiet. Traffic hummed far below. Then something happened I cannot fully explain, though I will try, knowing the words will fall short. I felt warmth starting in my chest, moving outward. Not the warmth of a heater or a blanket, something that came from inside. And with the warmth came something else, something I can only describe as being known. Every part of me, the parts I showed people and the parts I hid from everyone, including myself, was completely known by whatever was happening in that room, and completely accepted anyway. I have done things in my life I am not proud of. Business decisions that were not fair. People I treated like tools instead of people. Years of ignoring my children. 2 marriages I let fall apart because I cared more about my empire than the people inside it. I knew every one of those things in that moment on the floor. They were all present, and the warmth did not leave. The acceptance did not leave. Everything I had done wrong was fully known and fully covered by something I had not earned. I cried, not the quiet, controlled kind, but the kind that comes from somewhere so deep it surprises you. I cried for my son and the years I had not been present. I cried for Parasa and Elam. I cried for all the prayers that had felt like talking to a wall. I cried for the version of myself who had been running so fast for so long and had no idea what he was running toward. And in the middle of it, I heard something not with my ears but somewhere else. A clear, quiet voice that said, "Keve, I have been here the whole time. I gave you everything you built, and I gave it to you for a reason that is not about you." I lay on that floor a long time. When I finally sat up, the room looked the same, the window, the chair, the glass of water. But I was not the same person who had sat down in that chair. I knew it immediately. Something fundamental had shifted, like a bone out of place for years finally settling back where it belonged. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window and said out loud, "Jesus is real." Getting back to Tehran was one of the hardest things I have done. Not the flight was simple. What was difficult was walking back into my life, carrying what I now knew. Iran is not a place where you casually mention that you have given your life to Jesus. The Islamic Republic had very clear positions on what happened to Muslims who left Islam. The word for it is apostasy. The consequences were not theoretical. I went back to my routine meetings, calls, contracts, the daily business of being Keve Rastami. I still attended Friday prayers at the mosque near my house, because not attending would immediately raise questions I was not ready to answer. I stood in the rows with other men, bowed and rose, and recited words with my mouth while my heart carried on a completely different conversation. That contradiction was painful. Every Friday I felt like I was lying to the people around me, but I was not ready to stop lying yet, because stopping meant consequences I had not figured out how to face. I needed to learn more. I needed to understand who Jesus was beyond one night on a hotel floor. I needed a Bible, and I needed people. I went back to Baku 3 weeks later. I had kept the piece of paper Emmanuel gave me in my wallet, tucked between 2 other cards where nobody would find it. I found him by asking around near the waterfront until someone recognized my description and pointed me toward the construction site where he worked. I waited near the gate at the end of his shift. When he saw me, his face did something I will not forget. He smiled as though he had been expecting me. We sat in a small tea house nearby. He listened while I told him what had happened. When I finished, he closed his eyes for a moment, praying, I think. When he opened them, he said, "Brother, I prayed for you every day since that bench. I told God you were worth going after." I told him I needed a Bible in Farsi. I told him I needed to understand more about what I had experienced and what it meant to actually follow Jesus somewhere like where I lived. He said he knew people. What he connected me to was something I had not known existed in any organized way. Small groups of believers scattered across Tehran, Tabriz, and other Iranian cities. People who had come to faith through dreams, through the internet, through chance encounters, through satellite television channels broadcasting Christian content into Iran from outside the country. They gathered in apartments and homes in complete secrecy. They called themselves house churches, though never in any message or conversation that could be traced. Emmanuel connected me to a man named Vartan, an Armenian-Iranian Christian who had grown up in a Christian family in Tehran. Legal, since Armenian Christians were a recognized minority. But Vartan also worked quietly with people like me, Iranians from Muslim backgrounds who had come to faith and had no community, no resources, no safe way to grow. Vartan was cautious the first time we spoke, over a secure messaging application. He asked many questions. He was not being rude, he was being responsible. He had seen what happened when the wrong person found out about these groups. People arrested, people losing their jobs, people separated from their families. He needed to know I was genuine. After several conversations, he met me in person in Tehran, in a small cafe outside the districts where I was usually seen. He was quiet, careful-eyed, about 40. He carried a stillness I was starting to recognize as connected to the faith I was trying to understand. He gave me a New Testament in Farsi, printed on very thin paper, small enough to fit inside a notebook cover. I brought it home and read it every night after everyone in my house had gone to sleep. I read with the kind of focus I used to give to contracts and financial documents. Every line, every story, every word Jesus spoke. It changed me in ways I was not prepared for. Reading the Gospels was not what I expected. I had been told the Bible was corrupted, altered, unreliable. But what I found was a Jesus nothing like the watered-down version presented in my religious education. Fierce and tender and direct and compassionate, unlike anyone I had ever encountered. He said things no reasonable person would say if he were only a good teacher or a respected prophet. He said he was the way, the truth, and the life. He said no one comes to God except through him. He said, before Abraham was, I am. There was no comfortable middle option with this person. And the way he treated people everyone else had given up on, the woman the crowd wanted to stone, the tax collector hated by his own people, the sick, the outsiders, the ones the religious establishment had decided were too far gone. He went toward all of them. He did not wait for them to clean themselves up first. That was the part that broke me open every time I read it. He did not wait for me to be worthy. He came for me on the floor of that hotel room exactly as I was 50 years of self-building and pride and missing the point. He came anyway. Through Vartan I connected with a small house group in Tehran, 7 people, sometimes 8 or 9, meeting in different apartments to avoid patterns, phones left in another room, windows covered, voices kept low. In that small room, I experienced something I had never experienced in any mosque I had ever entered. An engineer, a teacher, a young woman who worked in a shop, a retired government employee who had served 30 years before Jesus found him. None of us had any reason to be in the same room, and yet we were the same. We had all been found by the same person. We were all carrying the same quiet warmth that did not go away. I began using my money the way I had used it my entire life, strategically, but for completely different purposes. I paid rent in advance for 2 apartments used as meeting places by house church groups in Tehran, through arrangements that could not be traced back to me. I funded the printing and distribution of Farsi New Testaments through a network Vartan helped me understand. I set up a fund he could access to help families who had been discovered, people who needed to move quickly, who needed money for a journey they had not planned, who needed help the state would not give them, and their own families sometimes could not, because they were considered to have done something shameful. I also did something I had never done in my business life. I began actually paying attention to the people who worked for me. I had always known their names, always signed their paychecks. I had never really seen them as people with full lives outside what they did for my companies. I started asking simple questions. How is your family? Is your child recovering from the illness you mentioned? Is the situation with your mother improving? Small things, but the looks on people's faces when I asked were not small. They looked like people who had not expected to be seen. I cannot tell you this changed my business. That is not the point. It changed me. Every time I actually looked at someone working for me, I thought about Emmanuel on that bench in Baku, a man with very little, completely at peace, and I thought about what he had that made the difference. For nearly 3 years I lived this way, running my companies by day, reading my Bible at night, meeting with a house church when it was safe, funding what I could without drawing attention. But something was growing in me during those 3 years. A pressure. A sense that I was keeping something contained that was meant to be released. Every time I heard of a believer who had been discovered and was suffering, every time I read about people across Iran having dreams of Jesus with no one to help them understand, every time I sat in that small room and felt the realness of what we shared, I thought about all the people who did not have what we had. I thought about what my mother used to say, that we are only visitors here, holding things for a while. I had been holding a great deal for a very long while. I was starting to understand I was being asked to do something significant with it. The decision did not come all at once. It came in pieces, over months of prayer and conversation with Vartan and Emmanuel, whom I stayed in regular contact with. It came from reading certain passages over and over, passages about acknowledging Jesus before others, about what it meant to be silent when speaking was needed. One line in the Gospel of Mark I could not get past. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes. I read that and thought, I am not ashamed of Jesus, but I am very hidden. Being hidden for safety's sake is one thing. Being hidden forever out of fear is something else. I traveled to Amman in the spring of 2018, legitimate business meetings, real ones. But while there, I made a separate arrangement through connections in the underground network. I met with people from an organization that helped persecuted Christians share their stories with the world. Not to endanger anyone, Most of what they did involved protecting identities, blurring faces, changing names. But they also helped people who had made the choice to speak fully and openly, people who had calculated the cost and decided to pay it. I told them I wanted to be one of the second kind. The man I spoke to, a Lebanese Christian who had done this work for over 15 years, looked at me for a long time after I said that. "Do you understand what this means for everything you have in Iran?" he asked. "Do you have a plan for where you will be after this becomes public?" "I am working on that," I said. "We can give you time," he said. "You do not have to do this immediately. Think carefully." I have been thinking carefully for 3 years. Recording happened in a small room in a residential building in Amman, a white wall behind me, good lighting, a camera on a stand, the Lebanese man sitting off to the side. I wore a simple white shirt, no expensive suit, no watch. I had not planned what I was going to say. I simply started talking. I said my name was Kaveh Rostami, an Iranian businessman, for most of my adult life one of the wealthier men in my country. I told them I built my wealth by working very hard, by being very focused, by caring about almost nothing except my next goal. I told them I performed every religious duty required of me and was the emptiest person I knew. I told them about my father Hassan and his teaching. About my mother Zara and her different kind of faith, the kind that actually talked to someone. About building the business and what it did to my marriages and my children. About Darian and the phone call at 11 at night, and driving to Tabriz alone in the dark, realizing on the way back that I did not know my son. I told them about the cleric in Tehran and the words patience and later and reward that always came with no location in time. I told them about the bench in Baku and a man named Emmanuel who had almost nothing and had everything that mattered. I told them about the hotel room floor, the warmth, the voice, the word rest, and what it felt like to finally receive something I had not known I was starving for. I told them about the house church in Tehran, about Vartan and the small group meeting in changing apartments with their phones left in another room. About reading the New Testament on thin paper inside a notebook cover, about funding help for people who had been discovered and needed to move fast, and then I said the thing I knew would end my life in Iran as I had known it. Jesus Christ is the source of everything I have ever built. Every deal, every contract, every coin. It came from him. He gave it to me, not so I could build something for myself, but so I could use it for something larger than myself. I spent 50 years thinking my wealth came from my own hard work and God's favor on a religious man, but it came from Jesus. It was always from Jesus, and he waited with more patience than I deserved until I was ready to understand that. I said, I know what happens now. I know what happens to my assets in Iran. I know what happens to my name. I know what my family will say. I know I cannot go home the same way I left. I know all of this, and I am telling you anyway, because what Jesus gave me is not something that can be taken by a government decree or a family statement or a frozen bank account. What he put inside me is permanent, and it is worth more than everything I am walking away from. I looked directly at the camera and said, to every Iranian watching this, to every Muslim lying awake at night feeling what I have described, that hollow feeling, that sense that you are doing everything right and reaching nothing, I want you to know that feeling has a reason. It is not a flaw in you. It is the space made for something you have not received yet. You were made for a relationship, not a religion. And the relationship is available right now, not after you become good enough, not after you perform enough. Right now, as you are, wherever you are. Video was released 6 weeks after the recording. In those 6 weeks, I moved carefully. Some assets I restructured through legitimate channels before anything became public. Some I left, knowing what would happen to them, having already made peace with it. When the video became public, it moved fast. Within 3 days, it had reached hundreds of thousands across Persian language platforms. Within a week, it had been picked up by international news organizations covering Iran. The government's response was what I expected: statements calling the video fabricated, calling me mentally unwell, calling it foreign interference. My name was invoked in Friday sermons in several cities as an example of someone corrupted by outside enemies. My family released a statement saying they did not know this man, meaning me, meaning they were separating themselves from me publicly and formally. I read that statement and sat with it for a while. It hurt. Of course it hurt. These were people I had genuine love for, but I also knew they were doing what they felt they had to do to protect themselves, and I did not blame them. What I did not expect, or did not let myself expect, because hopping for it felt too large, was the messages. They started the same day, through channels the organization had set up. Farsi mostly, but also Arabic, Turkish, Azerbaijani, from Iran and from the diaspora, from other Muslim-majority countries, from people describing dreams they had never told anyone, a man in white speaking to them with a kindness they could not find in their waking life. People who had been reading the Bible secretly on their phones for months or years with no one to talk to about it. One message came from a man in Tabriz, my father's old trading route, who said he had been a seminary student for 4 years. He said something had been wrong for a long time. The closer he got to the center of religious life, the emptier he felt. He said he had encountered Jesus in a dream 9 months earlier and had lived in complete isolation with that knowledge ever since, unable to tell a single person. Watching my video, he said, was the first time he felt he was not entirely alone. He said he had said yes to Jesus that night. A woman wrote from a city in western Iran, a school teacher and mother of 2, who said she had been secretly listening to a Farsi-language Christian radio program on a small hidden radio for nearly 2 years. She said she had prayed to Jesus privately many times, but never told anyone, not knowing who was safe. She said my name gave her something to hold on to, that if someone like Kaveh Rastami could do this, maybe she could too. These messages have not stopped. They are still coming. I want to close with something, not as a speech, just as someone talking to you. I know some of you listening to this are in a situation I understand, a place where what you believe about Jesus could cost you something real. Your family, your job, your safety, maybe more than that. I'm not going to tell you it costs nothing. It does. It cost me things I still feel when I let myself think about them. But I will tell you this, the peace Jesus put inside me on that hotel floor in Baku is not something I think about occasionally or feel only on good days. It is there when I wake up. It is there when I receive difficult news. It is there when I think about what I left behind. It does not rise and fall with my circumstances. I never experienced anything like it, not in 50 years of being a Muslim, not in all the prayers and fasts and pilgrimages, not in any deal I ever closed or any amount of money I ever made. It is real. He is real, and he is not hard to find. If you are tired, if you are carrying something with no name that weighs on everything, if you have done all the right religious things and still feel like you are talking to a ceiling, I want you to do what I did on that floor. Just say his name. Tell him you are tired. Tell him you need rest. Tell him you heard a story about a man from Qum who was empty for 50 years and found what he was looking for on a hotel room floor in Baku. He will answer you. He answered me. He will answer you.